Welcome back to another episode of Offbeat Adventures. We are standing here once again on the grade of the former Canadian Northern Railway and later Canadian National Railway's Kinghorn Subdivision. We are on the west side of what is known as Kinghorn Road, which is just to the west of where Kinghorn Station was on the line. We are just to the east of the community of Jellicoe, which we're actually going to be traveling towards today here in the municipality of Greenstone, Ontario. So what we're going to be doing is we are going to be working our way again about 4 miles from this road into Jellicoe. We're going to be picking up where we left off on a previous hike. So last fall we had done the portion here. These are all redos. So I've been through this section before. We actually did this hike 3 years ago. 3 years ago on July the 1st, so Canada Day, we did this hike, and so we're redoing it because there's some new information, some new things that we want to take a look at here on this particular hike. Lots of things right from the get-go here. So there's actually here there's a telegraph pole, and there's get my bike out of the way. There's a date nail on there, and it says 57. So that telegraph pole was installed in 1957. So again, we're going to be doing 4 miles. What's kind of interesting is this is milepost 45 on the line. So milepost 45 on the Kinghorn subdivision. I've looked and I've looked and I've looked. There's no milepost marker. There's appears to be no traces of even where the pole was. There is a different mileage for the original line because the original line started in Hornpain as opposed to the later Kinghorn subdivision, which started in Long Lac. So the mileage for the original line, you have to add 100.8 miles to it, and so milepost 45 becomes milepost 145.8. Just gonna walk here a little bit. I was looking at on the side here too, because there is the road crossing. On the other side, there's the little stub of the flanger sign for the crossing. But I was looking and I didn't see anything. Just keeping our eyes out too. If that, I don't know exactly where that milepost marker, milepost 45 was. I'm guessing it was very close to where the road is, but you never know. So we're just having a look here. It's a beautiful spring day. It is the, I'm sure I got the right day here. It's the 11th of May. We had a little bit of a, it seems like we've had goofy springs the last few years. Really mild winter. Basically very little snow, very mild. See, there's a Dominion 42 insulator there, part of the telegraph pole. Not a lot of snow, and went away fairly quickly, and then the spring's been kind of all over the place. It's been warm, it's been cold, it's been rainy, and not even really rainy because it's still fairly dry. It's kind of annoying, actually. You know, it'll rain a little bit and then it'll be kind of misty and kind of gross. And anyway, okay, so here is actually our first point of interest on this line, or on this section, sorry. You can see we're up on a very high embankment. This embankment used to be a trestle. So a very common thing for railway lines to do is to infill trestles, turn them into embankments, just simply because they're a lot easier to maintain. Those wood trestles have to be replaced periodically, and so there is a milepost marker here where they've inserted the culvert, and there's a bit of a story to go along with the this. So I don't think there's any mileage. You can't read anything on that marker, so we're just assuming it's 45.1 because we're, I don't know, it's not probably a tenth of a mile, but close enough. And so on the original line, that would be 145.9. Okay, so again, originally 132 foot trestle across here. I'm going to show you a few maps because this trestle actually existed up until the early 80s. So let's have a look at those maps. All right, so let's talk a little bit about this. So I want to thank Richard for this information about what happened here with the trestle. So again, it was infilled in the early 80s. This is basically the waterway that you can see here eventually flows into what is known as Partridge Lake over there. And Partridge Lake is basically formed by a river, which some people know as the Sturgeon. Its proper name is the Namiwa-Minneconne River. So I'm just saying that this is a branch of the Namiwa-Minneconne. So there is a 12-foot culvert that was inserted at the bottom. So what they did to basically infill this is they started with 50 cars of riprap. So riprap is basically erosion control material. It's usually like stone or stuff like that, bigger stone material. So they had over 50 air dumps of riprap that went in first to basically secure the base, and that came from what is known, well, the railway people used to call it the Beardmore pit because it's to the west of Beardmore. I call it the Warrenford pit because there used to be a station like literally just right to the east of it called Warrenford Station. So again, the riprap came from there, and then there was approximately 300 or more air dumps of gravel from the McCurdy pit, and we've been to the McCurdy pit before. And so again, that formed the bulk of the embankment here, and then it was topped off with ballast to basically form this. So it is quite the structure here. I'm not going to say too much, but there may have been some issues with infilling this. Might have been a scolding involved in this. So anyway, let's hop up on the bike here and keep moving along. So again, it is a beautiful day today. Unfortunately, it's rather bright and sunny, which is okay, but it does create some issues with some shadows and things like that. This is something you're going to see a lot on this section here. You can basically see that there's a piece of a tie that's still in place. You're going to see lots of pieces of tie. So again, here's another one. So again, we came through this section almost 3 years ago. It was in the summer, it was in July. And so we wanted to, we've been basically redoing all of these hikes, and we're trying to do them in the fall or in the spring when the leaves are down, and so we can see a little bit better. Now, try to find an example here. We're not too far from leaf out. You can see all the trees are budding here. Again, we've had a bit of rain. It's been mild, like I said, and there's been some rain, and so probably by next weekend, for sure, the leaves are going to be popping out. We're going to get to that spring kind of limey green leaf stage. Around here, some of the grass hasn't. Wow, the ballast is bad here. The grass hasn't started to grow. Back at home in Thunder Bay, my lawn's all green. Lots of the trees have at least started popping their leaves. So here we're going through another cut. There's another piece of tie here. So maybe we should start with our usual history lesson. Gonna have to interrupt ourselves a few times here. So this line was constructed by Canadian Northern Railway between 1911 and 1914. It was going to be one of the final pieces in Canadian Northern's transcontinental ambitions. The Canadian Northern Company got its start in Manitoba back in 1896, buying up some charters and some smaller lines and things like that. Their first big project was the construction of a line between the then city of Port Arthur, which is now Thunder Bay, and Winnipeg. So that was built between 1899 and 1902. And following that began acquiring and building lines all throughout the prairies. Around that same time, they began doing the same process north out of Toronto, eventually reaching up into the Sudbury area. Now, there came a point where the powers that be in the company realized that in order for the railway to be viable long term, that they would need a transcontinental line. They just couldn't depend on you know, the little bit of eastern traffic, and they were doing very well in Western Canada, but they needed that transcontinental line. They didn't want to build it though, particularly the section between Sudbury, specifically Ruel, where the end of steel was, and Port Arthur, because it was going to be very difficult construction and therefore very expensive. And so they looked at all kinds of different options to kind of wow, the ballast is bad here, you know, to try to get around that. But unfortunately, you know, they had to build. And so again, construction began in late 1911 and again was completed by 1914. Now unfortunately, shortly after the line was completed, the Canadian Northern Company started running into some financial difficulties. You can see a piece of the telegraph pole here. A lot of it had to do with some of the financial pressures of World War I, and then a lot of construction issues, right? So building this section, building through the mountains of British Columbia. And so by 1917, the company was insolvent and had to be taken over by the Canadian government. And then in late 1918, Canadian Northern was merged, amalgamated, whatever you want to call it, with another a bunch of bankrupt Canadian government-owned lines called the Canadian Government Railways. And that merger formed Canadian National Railways. And so the name of this line changed at that point. It became, it had originally been the Long Lake Subdivision of Canadian Northern Railway, and became the eventually the Long Lac Subdivision. It was originally the Long Lake Subdivision, Canadian National Railways, and then became the Long Lac Subdivision. So around that time, Canadian National started a plan of rationalizing their lines. So just further back, so just 45 miles to the east at Long Lac, or Longue Lac, en français, basically the Canadian Northern line came within 30 miles of another railway line, which was the National Transcontinental Line, which was another transcontinental line that had been built in a partnership between the Canadian government and the Grand Trunk Company. So the Canadian National built a line between Long Lac and that line at Nakina, and became known as the Nakina Cutoff. And the purpose of that was basically they could run now trains north from Toronto over the Canadian Northern line, cut off, go to Nakina, and then run over the NTR, the National Transcontinental Line, to Winnipeg. It shaved 100 miles off the route between Toronto and Winnipeg, and the grades were better. And so when that happened, basically everything from Long Lac to the west to Port Arthur became a secondary line, and it was no longer on the main line. And so obviously this was part of that. And so the name changed. So in 1924, this became the Kinghorn Subdivision. And it continued to operate as the Kinghorn Subdivision until 1960, when the name changed again. So Canadian National merged this line, the Kinghorn Subdivision, and the more westerly Dorian Subdivision into one line, basically running from Long Lac to Port Arthur. And then the line continued to operate until 2005, when Canadian National decided to discontinue service, and the rails were pulled up between 2008 and 2010. Okay, so we've got another point of interest here. So basically we have a concrete culvert. The mileage is really hard to read on there. I've written down on the original on 146.2. It's obviously 145 point something. You can see it's all flooded in here. So what we're going to do is we're going to use some old footage. We're going to use some 2021 footage so we don't have to go down there and get wet. All right, so we made our way down below the level of the grade. We're on the south side. So here you can see this fairly small diameter concrete culvert. Nothing too spectacular. I can't tell what type of condition it's in. It's kind of wet and kind of a little bit swampy here. So I can't really get into the opening to see. There is a fair bit of water here. So what we're going to do is we're going to jump the grade and go take a look at the north side. Okay, so we're down here on the north side of the grade. You can see this, it's not really a creek. It's almost like kind of a little swale. And you can see that it's kind of low, so that's why it's kind of full of water here. But you can see the opening of the culvert here. Again, it looks like it's in pretty decent shape. Again, I don't know when these segmented concrete culverts were put in, but they do look like they're fairly old. There is quite a bit of old kind of moss growing on there. You can kind of see some of the size of the trees that are kind of growing up on top of there. My dog seems very fascinated with what's happening in there. Okay, so we're going to make our way back up to the grade and continue our journey to the south.